Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including Bally Sports Ohio without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. One of the last pieces of the Cavs offseason puzzle finally came into view with an Isaac Okoro 3-year extension. I think we are pretty much locked and loaded for what this team is going to look like heading into next year, at least in terms of significant pieces. Obviously, there's still, the possibility something changes. But this close to training camp, I think we can settle in and discuss this team even more than we already have. And joining me today is, of course, my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. I had a successful week in Vegas. The World Series of Warzone was a successful event. I did not lose money, which is great. Any Vegas trip in which you don't lose money is great. We were at an off-strip casino, Justin, and let me tell you, it's a lot easier not to lose money at a $10 blackjack table than a $25.
I'm not much of a gambler at all, so my only time going to Vegas, I was up just a little bit because all I play is poker. I don't like the slots.
You played poker in Vegas? That is the most intimidating thing in the world to me.
Let me tell you this. I bluffed on a $50 bet, and I could feel the pulse in my neck. Like I was like, and normally I'm perfectly fine, but when it's a cash game, I think it was like $150 buy-in or whatever at the Bellagio, and I could literally feel like if the guy was paying enough attention, he would have known that I was screwing with him. Luckily, I won the hand, and that was enough of a thrill. I ended up we had the flights were covered with some points and stuff like that, so I basically covered for like our hotel with my poker winning. So
how
that was
long were you at the table? Because I just couldn't imagine being there for more than 5 minutes before being exposed as a fraud.
2 hours. Me and my buddy did about 2 hours at the poker table.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah,
not much of a gambler, but sat at a poker table in Vegas.
Well, poker's not really gambling.
While the rest of us rubes sit at roulette.
Poker's not really gambling, there's at least some strategy with it. But, speaking of gambling, it's not a gamble when you can lock up a guy like Isaac Okoro, 23 years old, 3-year extension. I think both of us were very happy to see that. You see some of the reporting mentioning that it's less than the qualifying offer, less than, kind of that mid-level exception amount. And for a player of his caliber, I feel very similar to this extension as I did with the Jared Allen one, where I'm like, he's already kind of worth it at that kind of range. I think what he brings to the table as one of the better point of attack defenders in the league, his shot has improved the last couple of years, shot 39% from three. Obviously, we still need to see if that's going to translate to the playoffs. But typically, like when you're talking about players that you bring in for a mid-level exception, they're not guys that you necessarily count on performing well in the playoffs. And at least with Isaac Okoro, I felt better, last year, at least there were times where he would step in and really make an impact. Like I think of that stretch in game 2 where he hit the step back 3. His defense was sound. He made a big difference in that game. Obviously, his defense on Paolo in game 7 was crucial to that win as well. So, there's signs there. Obviously, there's a lot of room for growth. But I think the player that he is over the regular season is already very much worth this kind of deal.
I would say this is like kind of the definition of what I would consider to be a mutually exclusive deal. I think, or a mutually beneficial deal. Sorry, because like I think on one hand, I think there were versions of probably Isaac's camp where you're like, I was looking for way more than that reported number. I'm sure there are some members of the Cavs camp who were looking for less, but like, I think this is right at the right in the dead center of the threshold in terms of the reported terms that make me feel really good. I think for Isaac, I something I strongly believe gets underrated in these sorts of discussions is the value of term. A bird in the hand isn't always worth two in the bush. And like, I think like there's a degree to which like you locked up, what's reportedly a multi-year extension, or not an extension, a new deal. And and like that is set. You're good till through 2027, and that really matters for a player who and I feel like Isaac's kind of career is on that one of those kind of on that threshold of like, is he going to take a leap and become the 3-and-D wing that we all expected, or is the shot going to go back down and maybe he's not quite as valuable, and like so I think it feels like a very good in the middle kind of outcome where the Cavs don't lose a valuable asset for nothing. I think it's really important to note that he's the best perimeter defender on the team by a mile. Like it's not, I guess Evan could be up there, but that's really not how I personally feel Evan is best used as a lead perimeter stopper. So I think he's the best perimeter defender on the team. I don't think anyone's particularly close to him. The qualifying offer is kind of the worst of both. If this is the best of both worlds, I kind of feel like the QO is worse. Is the worst? The worst. I cannot talk today. Because now he's got a no trade clause, and now he enters unrestricted free agency in a market that doesn't look like it's going to have a ton of money, and then it could get really messy. Instead, we found this feels like a pretty healthy negotiation where the Cavs get another more time to look at him. They have more flexibility there than losing a salary slot for nothing and having to, because where they are, I don't think they'd get much closer to the tax than where they are. And so I just think ultimately comparing what they gave Okoro to any free agents on the market, I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, and there is reporting out there that with this they are slightly over that luxury tax amount. I think it's important to clarify for people that are still getting a handle of this new CBA. There's the luxury tax line, then there's the first apron, then there's the second apron. So they are not over the first apron, which kind of triggers some team building penalties. But if you are over that luxury tax line at the end of the season, you start that repeater clock, right? And I think with the extensions kicking in next year, they are going to be a tax team at the very least next season. And
it might even back out over time just because of the way the cap's expected to rise. But yeah.
Right. So, when it comes to this season, I think that there's certainly a possibility that they try to get back under by the end of the year. That just has to be done by the end of the year. It doesn't matter where you're at right now. And I think when modern team building, I think it's a lot harder to keep depth in today's NBA. Like there's just not a lot of teams that just have awesome guys 1 through 10. It's just not feasible, especially when you do have that top end talent. And I think the Cavs actually do have a good amount of depth. And that's one of the things I want to discuss on today's podcast is kind of going through the bench options, similar to what we did last week with the starters, and talk about, how we rank them in terms of impact. But I think the really interesting thing is if there is, some willingness to go back under that luxury tax line by the trade deadline, I like that we do have a variety of options right now, and we can see who fits best within a Kenny Atkinson system, who fits best within this system, playing off of these core guys that we know are going to be the focal points of this team. I think that is going to be what we're going to be looking at between now and February to make that assessment of, all right, where are the redundancies? Who's bringing a skill set to the table that we feel can be covered up by someone else within the rotation? And when it comes to Isaac Okoro, part of why I'm really happy that this deal is done is when it comes to that point of attack defense, I don't think that that's a redundant skill set on this roster. I don't think someone can come in and bring that type of impact on the defensive end of the floor. And I'm really, really interested to see if there is meat left on the bone, if we can unlock some more to Isaac Okoro's game within a Kenny Atkinson offense and defense as well, right? Because we have to understand that there's going to be changes on both ends of the floor. And I guess, we're probably going to end up repeating ourselves a fair bit because I think where we wanted to see Isaac's game go has remained steady regardless of who's coaching this team. But I want to ask you, Carter, what are kind of some of those swing things that you're hoping to see from Okoro between now and February?
Between now and February?
Yeah, because that to me that's the evaluation period when we're looking at the rotation. When we're looking at these rotation guys.
This is one of those things that's really tough because for the most part he was kind of the perfect regular season soldier last year. He hit threes, He worked really hard, even on games where the rest of the team maybe was in the dog days. Was a transition game changer for them on offense. And like that stuff I kind of expect. I mean, to your point, there is a little bit of repeating ourselves where it's like, is the volume going to be up? Is that form? And like maybe even throwing aside the percentages, is the form going to feel consistent? Like I'm not sure there's ever been a player where I've been more sure I knew whether the ball was going to go in or out before the ball left his hand.
Right.
Are those kind of consistencies over years of reps going to start showing themselves and make it easier for him to shoot at, the percentage probably isn't going up, but with more volume, is he going to look in a more free flowing offense, ideally catching the ball with advantage a little bit more? Is his dribble game going to look a little more fluid and less rigid? I've always kind of felt like
it's like he's flexing his chest as he dribbles.
I don't know if you've ever seen those like tinfoil balls that people make where you take a piece of tinfoil and you hammer it and it can turn into like a perfectly packed sphere. That's Isaac driving at his best and his worst, right? It's just like everything's kind of tense, and I want to see some fluidity in his drive. And I think that would really go a long way, because in the postseason, I think the problem, yes, obviously the 3-point shot has completely abandoned him in some of these postseason games, and you can't afford to let that happen, in the postseason, for just about any role player. But I think just as disappointing as his 2-point game has abandoned him, he's not been able to finish against playoff defenses. And I think that lack of fluidity has maybe been part of that. So I want to see that kind of stuff happen, because even against the Magic and the Celtics, he got good closeouts that he could attack and was not able to finish over them. And he is athletic enough and works hard enough that I want to see that stuff just get a little bit better.
Yeah, obviously, getting the 3-point volume up is going to be one thing. Even if it's just one attempt more per 36 than last season, I think that would have some impact. I agree with your thought that you'd like to see him get the ball with advantage more, because I feel like when he gets the ball off of cuts, he makes some really nice reads. Like his vision, he keeps his head up and he's aware of where everyone else is going to be on the court from a spacing standpoint, and he's able to deliver those passes. It's just his dribble drive game isn't at the level where he's able to weaponize that, right? Like when he's attacking off the dribble, I feel like he's not making the same reads in that scenario, just because he's not able to create the same advantages in those spots. And that kind of gets me to where I want to see his game change, because when I look at Isaac Okoro and I look at players within that archetype around the league, the biggest differentiating factor is their ability to impact the game in other ways beyond their scoring. Because I think from a strictly skill set standpoint, Isaac Okoro is a better point of attack defender than Josh Hart, and I think he's a better shooter in a vacuum than Josh Hart. But Josh Hart at least has that willingness to keep shooting in the playoffs, and that really matters. But the biggest difference is, even when Josh Hart's shot abandons him, as we saw like in that Miami series, we saw that in the series against Indiana as well, where the 3-point shot just isn't there. He's making an impact in the game because he's generating offensive rebounds. He's moving enough to kind of get those assist opportunities. I think he's a better passer than Okoro, as much as I like Okoro's vision. It's all those other kind of ways that he impacts the box score beyond just standing in a corner and shooting that I think makes him more of a playoff performer, even when that shot is wildly inconsistent. And I went back and I watched, because, NBA.com, it's really easy to go to a player page and just click on like a stat like offensive rebounds and watch it. Josh Hart's offensive rebounds, know where they aren't coming from? Him standing in the corner, watching a shot go up and crash in the glass. He's getting those offensive rebound opportunities, one in transition, and he's also getting it because he's being used as a screener, either for the ball handler, sometimes even for a big man that's moving kind of along the baseline where, all right, I'm going to set a screen for a big. They're going to, reposition themselves on the other side of the basket for a post-up, and if they miss that shot, everyone's panicking to get to that big, and I'm going to crash the glass in that scenario. That's where I'm really interested, because I do think Okoro has shown at times an ability to go and get some contested offensive rebounds, make a difference in that area. It's just inconsistent. And I really wonder if that has to do with, his worst stretches of plays being when he's completely minimized within the offense, where you're just going to stand in the corner and you're going to play defense, rather than the stretches of time where we've seen him actually involved in creative ways as a screen setter, moving around off ball, just like being in position to capitalize on those offensive rebounds. Because I really do think that that's one of those swing skills that, if he's weaponized in that way, takes him from an impactful player to someone that can be a playoff performer regardless of whether or not that shot falls.
Yeah, right now, to your point about, the things that take him from, role player to like straight up like, kind of an every down player, is like, I do think of him almost like a specialist in football, your goal line running fullback or like that wide receiver you kind of put in motion to go pick up a big chunk play, but maybe isn't like a guy you send on a lot of routes downfield. Like right now, he's at his best when you can just say, go do this one thing very, very, very well. And we'll live and die with kind of the results of that one thing. I will push back a little bit on the standing in the corner, or, the crashing the glass thing for him. The one thing that does make it different is he has to go get back and guard the best guy on the other side of the floor. And if he's out, if he finds himself out of position, this is a spot where the Cavs' small backcourt can be a bit of a challenge, because you don't want Paolo Banchero to run the floor and to get matched up on Darius or Donovan on a cross match, because Isaac was hunting for an offensive rebound. Now, with that said, I do think there's a risk of being overly orthodox where you go, well, you just can't have him crash boards then. It's like, no, you just get him involved in the play, to your point. You don't have to have him run in from the corner. Just have him set a pick at the free throw line, so he's just right there already, So I do think, even though I'm advocating on behalf of the Devil a little bit there, I do overall get what you're saying.
And honestly, like it is a very smart point there. Like I think you're correct in bringing that up, and that ties into, okay, well, how is he being used, right? Like it all goes back to some of these opportunities are system based, right? Like even though we think of things like offensive rebounds, steals, and all that as, guys being event defenders or event players that generate these opportunities for themselves, sometimes it's about, being put in those positions to create those opportunities. The one thing I will say is whether, he's setting a screen baseline to have J.A. flare to the other side to get a post up or whatever the case may be, whether it's that or him standing in the corner, he's still sprinting 94 feet back on defense to, guard that primary ball handler. Like baseline is baseline, whether you're in the corner or you're in the middle of the court, although of course it is a little more congested. But I am happy that you brought that up as an example, because I do think, and this is something we've talked about before, I do think Okoro has been a bit of a victim of increased expectations. Like the team's expectations and goals outpaced his kind of more traditional development curve. Like he is still the same age as Evan Mobley, but as much as, I think Donovan Mitchell being added to this team, I think it actually has been beneficial for the development of Darius, Mobley, and Allen. I think the context that they've had to learn and the struggles that they've had, it's really good to get that at this point of their developmental curve. I do think Okoro has suffered a little bit, even though he has gradually improved year over year, just because with Donovan, it forces him to play more three. And I think his best natural position is at the 2. I think that's where he found a rhythm playing next to Lauri Markkanen. I think, even something like you saying he needs to get back on defense because there's the smaller backcourt, that's less prominent if he's playing as the shooting guard in those lineups. And, credit to him that he's still been able to adapt and improve. And, the 3-point shots improve. The defensive metrics keep getting stronger from an already high floor. But I do think that context makes things tougher for him. Like if he was playing in a situation like the Indiana Pacers, for example, I don't think, the shot coming and going would really matter because he'd be playing as a shooting guard and there's spacing all around the court, right? Like there's shooting with Miles Turner. You have shooting at every single position. That's how Indiana can play someone like a TJ McConnell that thinks about shooting once every 3 games, right? Okoro's a better point of attack defender than TJ McConnell, and that's what he's primarily out there for, other than his phenomenal playmaking, which is obviously better than Okoro. But I do think
is his unbelievable isolation scoring. He's always near the top of the league in ISO scoring, and
especially in playoffs.
Talk about like a fluid play, a fluid scorer who just like has his own rhythm that kind of throws guys off.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac doesn't do a lot of throwing guys off right now.
No, he doesn't. And my point there, and you're correct, obviously they're not a one-to-one comparison, but I just think he's in a scenario where the shooting is so important that it almost wipes out everything else when you get to that playoff context, where that would not be the same case with another roster, right? And to some
and we're going to learn how much of that is actually true, or whether it's coaching, or in scheme, because like there's a lot of things we just know about the Cavs right now that like some of them are going to get tested when Kenny implements his system.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was talking about, where, let's see how everyone fits within this scheme, within this system, and make those evaluations, whether, it's a consolidating of some of this bench talent to address a different position with the assumption that we have some depth that can move up and kind of fill those roles, or whatever the case may be. I'm just really curious to see how Isaac Okoro is used, if he's used in different ways, and whether or not, he's put in position to do his best work, just like Zoom helps you do your best work. Because, Carter, only you can do your best work. Zoom AI Companion can help you do the rest, like automatically taking notes, answering meeting questions, and helping you respond to your coworker. Available at no additional cost with eligible paid plans. Work happy with Zoom AI Companion. Carter, let's go on and power rank the Cavs bench. We went deep, nitty gritty with all of the Cavs starters last week. I want to kind of go at starting. Let's lay some ground rules here. Expected impact at the start of the season. How would you rank the kind of the Cavs bench?
All right. Feel free to quibble with my rankings.
Oh, I will. Trust me.
But I'm going LeVert, Okoro, Wade, Niang, Jerome, Tyson, Merrill, CPJ, Tristan.
Okay.
Let me note a few things that I'm not confident in. I'm not confident that Niang won't be higher on this list in practice. He was not our 9th man last year. He played all 82 games. He also, I thought had a bit of an up and down year that, you can conceivably imagine a bit of a right sizing a little bit. So Niang is kind of question number 1. And then I wonder if I've got Jerome a little too high. I'm not sure. Did you hear a little? I think Lowe mentioned the Ty Jerome thing on his pod.
I love that.
That there was a little buzz coming out of Ty Jerome and in off-season workouts. So I think.
Can I just say, it's so funny, like how often we complain, the Cavs aren't getting national coverage, and then you just get like a curveball. Like, man, there's some Ty Jerome buzz out there.
That is, if you're ever wondering if Zach Lowe is still plugged in, he's getting Ty Jerome buzz.
You know what? Is that like an easy out for him? Let's go conspiracy theory on this. Is that something that Zach Lowe just like throws in because he's if I just throw like a 10th man's getting some buzz with a team that we're not really talking about, I'm going to keep my bona fides as a basketball junkie.
This is you creating the world you want to see. You don't want to you don't want to believe in anything, and I don't accept it. I'm not engaging with this.
Thank you. I don't think I believe it either, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, you're a scumbag. So I think I think that's where I'd go. I don't find myself like wanting to put LeVert at the top, because I think when this team is healthy, I think his impact does tend to get a little. I feel like LeVert's best value is coming in as the cavalry when things aren't right. But nevertheless, he's still like I mean, to me, he feels like far and away the most talented player on the bench right now, at least in
Yes.
terms of the known quantities. Can you quibble with LeVert at 1?
No, I don't think you can. I think his impact the last couple of years has been underrated at times. The fact that he has been able to make up for the fact that, you know, his scoring can be inconsistent, with at least being a consistent playmaker and providing, you know, impact on the defensive end. I thought he's done a really nice job stepping in there. But I think you hit on the correct point, which is his impact is most felt when things aren't going right? Like when Donovan or Darius are out, you know, we're also down our second and third string point guard. He comes in and he provides that playmaking at a time that's really needed. And I'm most curious about that because when we're talking about identifying potential redundancies within the season, that's where I could see one developing, right? When you look at, okay, if Ty Jerome is healthy and able to provide playmaking, if Jalen Tyson is able to, you know, take some of the playmaking he displayed his final year in college and, you know, bring scoring to the table and play well positionally defensively, maybe there's some redundancies there. Does Craig Porter Jr. take a step forward and become even more pro ready than he showed last season? If those guys are bringing playmaking, all of a sudden, I think what makes him special and makes him so impactful on this Cavs team becomes just a little less special. Not that he isn't the most talented among these bench players, but that is potentially something that could be replicated, especially if you're talking about, you know, utilizing Evan Mobley and Jared Allen more as playmakers, right? If that's one of the ways that we anticipate them being able to generate spacing while having two non-spacers on the floor is by using them as playmakers, then all of a sudden you want more play finishers around, right? Like you don't need someone else that needs the ball in their hands to that same extent. But I think for right now, you're mostly on point. Like I think LeVert being number one coming in off the bench, that's correct. When you're talking about most impactful, Okoro, I can't quibble with him at number 2.
Real quick, one more thing on LeVert. Two things we got to keep mentioning. Had one of the best years of his career playing for Kenny Atkinson. So could see a bump there. Worth noting, the 3-point percentage really took a dive last year. He went from 39.2% all the way down to 32.5%. This is much like Okoro is limited by the roster construction around him in terms of dependence on his 3-point shot. I feel like you can kind of say the same for Karras. Like things just get a lot muckier out there if he's not hitting from 3. And I think if he's to hold on to that 6-man spot and hold on in terms of our power rankings, I feel like the 3-pointer, you know, has to just get up just a little bit closer to that career average of like 34-35%.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm hoping for from training camp, like obviously I'm going to eat up every highlight and all the buzz and all that stuff. I don't want to hear hamstring because I think one of the things that, you know, hurt LeVert and a lot of the Cavs shooters last year was kind of those lower body soft tissue issues, right? Like Garland, and Mitchell all came into the season, game 1 already dealing with some hamstring stuff. He had knee soreness later in the year, and I think that had an impact. So, you know, I'm hoping to get through camp in better shape than last year for sure. Because you're right, like whether or not that shot's falling is one of those big swings things for LeVert.
Yeah. So sorry to stop you from moving on, but I just wanted to make sure we touched on that before. What about Wade? Because, you know, I think he remains the highest ceiling role player for this team, because his plus minus when he's already a plus minus god, and when he's hitting from 3, everything kind of comes together. Like he kind of becomes the big wing guarder. He shoots threes. He doesn't eat up usage while also not being useless. He adds switchy defensive size so Evan can go roam without kind of sacrificing. He just does a lot of stuff for the team at his, like, I think at his best, he is the best role player for the team. But I think at his best is just hasn't been there enough. And, you know, I'm just not quite sure what to make of him.
I think you're correct putting him third just because the rules I laid out was who is going to be most impactful coming in off the bench. And, you know, those impact metrics that you mentioned, I think that they have value. I think it matches the eye test. Like when he's right and he's shooting well, and he's playing with confidence, he makes a big difference out there. And even when the shot's not necessarily falling, just because he is able to defend and rebound and do all those kind of things, it fills up a lot of holes. I think you're correct in that, like, Niang's probably going to play more. I would kind of expect him to play more. I wouldn't necessarily argue that he's more impactful, but Niang, and we saw it the second half of the season. Like, it's unfortunate that his best stretch of the year came at a time where, like, Strus and Mitchell and all these guys were out of the lineup, just because, like, the mood was so poor that I don't think what he was doing resonated. But, if he comes into this season feeling more comfortable with the team, more ready to kind of contribute and bounce back, I can see him breaking some games, right? Like, coming in, hitting a few shots, and all of a sudden the Cavs are able to rely on their stout defense to just kind of close out these games and just make things more fun, and give us an excuse to go deeper in the bench and see some of these guys be the gateway to Jalen Tyson minutes or whatever the case may be. But I do think it's correct to put Wade just above him in terms of impact, but I can see a bounce back season from Niang coming.
There's a trillion reasons to look for a bounce back, to take a bit to get comfortable. Ideally, again, I think we're all kind of expecting the offense to at least take a small bump. And then you just kind of look at his metrics. He took 1.3 less threes per 36, so his volume was lower, and shot 2.5% worse. He's a career 40% 3-point shooter, shot 37.5. Like, that's a really, like, for a guy whose shot is so important, it's a pretty precipitous drop. It doesn't feel like one, but it is. When you hear 2.5%,
because it was so much lower before that stretch where nothing else was going right, like, it felt worse than it is. Like, the fact that it got up to 37.5%, like, that in a vacuum isn't terrible, but it was just such highs and lows, and I think finding that consistency is going to be big for him.
Yeah, so I just think ultimately, like, a bounce back is there for them. Obviously, it's gonna take time to wash out the taste of the postseason where, it was a nightmare. He went 3 of 23 from 3 in his in his about 111 minutes. And, like, you can't do that. That can't happen, especially since a lot of those were open threes. I thought he guarded as admirably as he could against some really tough matchups, and but ultimately, like, you kind of are what your playoff performance says you are in a lot of people's minds. So I just think ultimately, to your point, though, between the rough start, the very rough end, it's obscuring a pretty darn good second third of the season. And, like, as a result, like, people are, I think, probably a little too bearish on Mr. Niang.
Yeah, man. It also just helps that he's a fun guy to root for. Like,
yep.
He's such a great personality off the court that I'm always going to have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for George. I don't disagree with you putting Ty Jerome after Niang, just because playmaking is so important, and because, playmakers 1, 2, and 3 in Garland, Mitchell, and LeVert do miss time, right? Like, and I think that he's going to need to step up, and he's going to need to be, Ty Jerome. Like, the Ty Jerome of, his last year in Golden State would have been very helpful for the Cavs last year, in a 6'5" ball handler that plays good defense, that shoots well from 3 and doesn't turn the ball over. Like, that's the type of player that can be really beneficial. And, the fact that he has experience playing for Kenny Atkinson, I think, is going to give him a leg up in comparison to a lot of these other guys. Like, I think having a trusty, steady hand is something that coaches really like to have, and that might be a bit of a security blanket that I wouldn't be surprised to see Kenny lean on at times.
Can I tell you, and we'll talk Jerome in a minute, I kind of want Tyson to take that spot, I think, but, like, I just think
we're going to get there. We're going to get there for sure.
There's just a lot of roster blockers, because Tyson being a first round pick, coming in with some hype off a great summer league, you might think, if you're a Cavs fan, you might be like, why is the guy who didn't even play last year, that's been kind of a career third stringer, ahead of our 20th overall pick? And I do think, to Jerome's best benefit is that one, he's got positional flexibility. He can play the one or the two. And there's just not as many bodies in those spots, like especially at the point guard level, like anytime a coach wants his team to get organized and be structured and play point guard minutes, if it's not Darius and it's not Donovan, it's probably going to be Ty. And like, I think it's just going to be one of those things where I feel like he's going to either have to lose it or get it taken from him because he doesn't have really any blockers in front of him, kind of in the mid card of the roster. The way Tyson does.
The backup point guard. He's second string point guard. As much as Mitchell's going to be that, he is the backup point guard when you're looking at the depth chart. And I'm actually going to quibble. This is where my first quibble comes in. I'm going to put Sam Merrill above Jalen Tyson.
Oh, wow.
Because I think, and this again goes to Tyson's going to have to prove it against some proven NBA players. And I think when it comes to Sam Merrill, this is a guy that we know can shoot the hell out of the ball. We know that Kenny Atkinson likes to use movement shooters, and that might be someone that he goes to at spots to create the kind of havoc off ball that's going to open up opportunities for like an Isaac Okoro or the bigs and generate spacing in lineups that have a bit of a deficit. We saw that in Brooklyn with Joe Harris. Obviously, he had movement shooters in Golden State. We don't need to go over those. I think that Sam Merrill is going to get the nod, at least when we're talking about the start of the season. I think that Sam Merrill would be kind of that 11th man that I would expect to be that spark plug coming in off the bench.
You're right. I'm wrong.
Okay.
No
That's
need
one
to
of my
quibble.
easier wins. Here
no
we
need
go.
to quibble. I think you're right. I think oh, good for you, buddy. I just think ultimately, Merrill does kind of fit, much in the way Isaac provides this kind of, gadget play specialist of like, I do this one thing better than everyone else on the roster. Sam does his thing better than everyone else on the roster. Like, is Jalen Tyson going to be the best ball handler on the roster? No. Is he going to be the best pick and roll guy on the roster? No. Is he going to be the best defender on the roster? No. Best shooter on the roster? No. And like, again, like, that's not his style, but this team has a lot of guys who can kind of do all those things that have a lot more tenure than him. Whereas if Kenny needs to unstick the offense and Darius or Donovan are sitting, Sam's going to be pretty darn tantalizing right there. And really on a night to night basis, you could see him and Tyson swap, or him and Jerome swap for that 10th man. Which again, I do,
depending on what's needed. Absolutely.
I do think Kenny's going to run a 10-man rotation. Obviously we won't know till we see it, but if he does, I think that 10th spot is going to be pretty fluid based on kind of whatever the game plan needs. So, so you win, buddy.
All right. The other quibble I have is I think I'd move Tristan up a bit. I'd certainly put him above Craig Porter Jr. I think CPJ, unfortunately, is going to be the bottom of the totem pole, or top if you're looking at actual importance of totem poles. But I think TT is going to be, again, he's the backup 5 right now. He's going to be called upon at times, whether there's foul trouble or stuff like that. He's going to eat some minutes. I'd kind of put him right next to Jalen Tyson. I think Tyson, depending on camp, that's going to be what determines whether, Tyson or TT should be higher in this pecking order. If he just comes in and he's awesome and it's like, hey, we got to find some ways to get this guy opportunity, I don't know where those minutes necessarily come from.
I feel like Tyson, no one can earn minutes in camp the way Tyson's going to be able to earn minutes in camp. Like I don't think there's a single player who can improve their own station in camp the way Tyson can.
And really, that's how it should be. When you are the rookie that hasn't proved anything,
he's got a longer way to go.
Guys with tenure are going to get the benefit of the doubt, and they should, right? Like you should, especially with the Cavs team. Like, we have quibbles. We'd like to see the depth improvement in certain areas. This is a lot of guys that I feel okay about stepping on a basketball court, right? Like we're going 14 deep, and like the last one is Craig Porter Jr., who played very admirably last year. That I'm still high on his ability to impact a game. Tristan gave them decent playoff minutes. Like that's nice to have this level of depth. The one unknown is Jalen Tyson, and we'll see where he goes. And
because to your point, even though there's a lot of depth, it's almost all known depth. Like Ty Jerome is unlikely to surprise me, even if he has a really good year. Okoro, I feel like I kind of know who he is right now. I'm not really looking for a big leap, even for, some of their younger guys. Merrill, CPJ. I feel like I nailed these guys. I feel like I know what they're going to be for the next 5 years. And again, you never can rule it out, but I pretty much know who they are. I have no idea what Jalen Tyson is.
Yeah. And the other thing looking at this, when we're evaluating who's going to stand out, who's going to earn minutes, where those redundancies going to become evident within this rotation, like a lot of this depth is at the 2-3. And I think that is going to be the interesting thing, right? Like when people hear us talking at the start, hey, like they might do some maneuvering to get under at the trade deadline, that might confuse people, right? Like they may sit there and say, well, I thought like this is, you guys sat here on the podcast and said this is the first year where they could potentially win a championship, even if it's like a 2% chance.
Yeah,
like,
you guys.
You're guilty by association. You
story of my life, brother.
Yeah. You know what you've gotten yourself into with this podcast. But like you said that, like that's at conflict with that, and I don't think that's necessarily the case, because there may be an opportunity to move some of these guys, gain some front court depth, and you just save like a couple million in the transaction, and that's enough to get you below the luxury tax line, right? Like even if it's a player that doesn't necessarily come with the same ceiling, they may address a need that becomes evident throughout the regular season. And hey, we feel like Jalen Tyson's able to step up, right? Like if you're talking about where is the biggest swing from these preseason power rankings to where it might be at the end of the year, I could see Jalen Tyson moving up past like Niang, right? Like I could see him going as high as like 8th on this list, even coming in as a rookie. Like you're signaling 7 for our audience. Like it's feasible. Like it's, I wouldn't completely rule it out. I like to stay a little more realistic and not be totally optimistic. But I think that is one of those kind of bigger swing spots. So if there's an opportunity to address a need and kind of consolidate some of this talent you have at one spot on the roster and move that over, I think you might be able to do that. And you're probably in a better position to do that than you were last year when Ty Jerome was out, when, Ricky Rubio didn't work out for the Cavs, where, Garland's banged up, right? Like if you do have this guard depth with, LeVert, Jerome, Merrill, Craig Porter Jr., and you feel good about all of that, and Jalen Tyson's able to provide you with some playmaking, you might be able to make a pivot and make yourself better while saving yourself some money in the process.
Yeah, and I think that kind of does just take me to my kind of wrap up on the bench, which is that, yeah, we have, 8 or 9 guys here that are, all very capable, all known entities, all people who can help you win basketball games. Is the top end talent of the bench good enough? I think the bottom end talent of the bench is, the bottom and middle end of the Cavs bench, I think is better than almost every other teams in the league. Is the top end of it good enough? Are the top, are the top 2-3 guys coming off our bench going to help the way, some of these guys can help other teams? Or, we talked a lot about pumpkin insurance, Justin, and they all turned into pumpkins last year.
Yeah.
Do you have confidence that's going to change this year?
I honestly, I have to see it. Like I have to see it. I have to see how these guys look within the context, because, my confidence probably lies more with the starters than it does with the bench. Like I think we've got a lot of names. I think we've got a lot of talent here. I think, when we're looking at evaluating things throughout the season, the natural kind of inflection point and guy that you focus on is Caris LeVert, because that mechanism is built into the contract situation where he is on an expiring deal now. You have to make an assessment of, okay, are we going to sign him? Are we going to, move on from him after the season? Are we going to move on from him at the deadline? Like you have to evaluate him under, a closer microscope than the other guys just because of that contract situation. But I don't think it's as straightforward as some people make it out to be, because he's at the top of our list, right? Like when you're talking about high-end bench talent, currently he is the highest end of that bench talent. So, I think obviously you hope that other guys step up and whatnot, but if that's not the case, you might be in a situation where you're like, all right, we're going to anticipate a Caris LeVert new deal this summer, Therefore, we have to make some other moves, and we're unsticking the roster and this, kind of jam at the bench in a different way than expected, right? And moving on from some salaries there. Like, it's not as straightforward as people make it out to be. I know it's very neat to say, okay, Jalen Tyson's the succession plan there, and here's steps A, B, and C. But you have to make, when it comes to team building in the NBA, and I know I'm repeating myself, you have to maximize the best talent that's available to you, and you have to constantly be evaluating how that talent fits with your most important players and how that talent is progressing within the system. And I think when we have changed the context, we have not changed the roster. This is historic levels to run it back, but we have changed the context of how they are going to fit within the system. It's going to be one of the interesting things, and probably what we're going to be talking about most the first couple months of the season.
Yeah, and it's funny. I said this kind of as the counterfactual, which is like, we think we know so much about the team and about these guys, and Kenny's going to challenge that. In some cases, the things we quote unquote know will be confirmed. We'll be like, oh nope, wasn't the coach, wasn't the system. This just doesn't work, or this, or the inverse. This works independent of who is calling, who's holding the whistle. So I think there is a lot to be said about that. I think, again, weird year. A lot of guys kind of extended into roles bigger than what I would prescribe for them in an optimal world for their talent level and skill set. And, so I do think there is a world in which a lot of these Cavs role players that are like, have, maybe B- C+ reputations might go to B+ B reputations by mid-season, just because things just happen to be clicking a little better. But again, we won't know till we see it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to identify these things before the season starts, because as much as some people will say, I won't believe it until I see it in the playoffs, and unless we're an actual contender, what's the point? Like, these are the kind of little things that you learn in the regular season that can forecast whether or not something's going to change in the playoffs, right? Like, this is the stuff that if you're just consuming nationally or whatever the case may be overlooked. But, we love regular season basketball. We love the process. We love player development. Like, that's the heart and soul of this podcast. So I think that this is one of the more interesting seasons that we've gone into. I'm fascinated to see how this goes. I think the starting lineup is fascinating, and I think how these bench pieces fit alongside that core, and especially when you're talking about within the context of when that core is staggered, I'm really, really interested to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, man. Just under 3 weeks until we hit postseason or preseason Cavaliers basketball. I cannot wait.
I can't wait either. I'm a little heartbroken that I'm going to miss some of those first preseason games, but I'll be rewatching them like a sicko. Probably not on my trip because I don't want Trish to kill me. But when I am back, I'm going to be binging basketball, and then we are going to obviously be binging basketball all season long. And we want to thank everyone for tuning in, for supporting us through all last season, for tuning in all off season. We love you guys. You guys, the fact that so many people are listening when there's not a lot going on, we really do appreciate it. So big thanks to you guys. Thanks to everyone on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, your review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chasedown's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.